Question for our audience: how does a navy lose a war against a nation with no navy? The answer is naturally just be Russia in the Black Sea. In a stunning turn of events, Ukraine has proven that Russian ships aren't safe even when they're on land. As in the early hours of September 14, 2023, Ukraine destroyed a Russian landing ship and a Russian Kilo-class attack submarine. This marks yet another loss of a major surface vessel and the first submarine loss for Russia in the war. In fact, it's the first combat loss of a submarine since the capture of an Argentinian submarine, formerly the American attack submarine Santa Fe, in 1982 during the Falkland War by the British. For Russia, it's the first combat loss of a submarine since World War II, and not just a humiliating blow, but a very expensive one. With the loss of the Ropuha-class landing ship Minsk and the Rostov-on-Don destroyed, Russia absorbed about a $500 million loss, or 10 million Russian beats, or whatever they're currently using for currency over there. The operation to turn Russia's Black Sea Fleet into artificial reefs goes far past the missile strike that destroyed these two very important Russian vessels, though, and stretches back a week to a series of special operation raids that will no doubt become the stuff of operator legend in the wake of the invasion. But first, why in the world is the Russian Navy getting utterly humiliated by a nation with no navy? Before the latest airstrikes, Russia had already suffered the loss of 4 major warships. The first was the landing ship Saratov, specifically targeted by Ukrainian forces in March of 2022 to deter any Russian attempt to conduct an amphibious landing behind the front lines. In the second day of the war, Russia captured the port of Berdyansk, and 2 months later it was using it as a major logistics hub. At the time, Russia was still optimistic about its own fighting capabilities and moved 2 of its Alligator-class landing ships to the port. From Berdyansk, Russia could potentially launch an amphibious landing, circumventing Ukraine's defensive lines in the south, or possibly even target Odessa itself, as it was once feared. Each Tapir landing-class ship, or Alligator as it's known by NATO, can bring a significant contingent to shore in a short amount of time. With the ability to move up to 425 troops with a complement of 20 tanks, or alternatively 40 infantry fighting vehicles, these landing ships were a constant concern for Ukrainian commanders who did not want to find nearly an entire battalion tactical group show up in their rear. The ships needed to be neutralized, but Ukraine had few options on the table to do so. Working with NATO-supplied intelligence, Ukraine launched an attack using an unknown number of Tochka ballistic missiles. Russian air defenses were likely unprepared for the attack, as ballistic missiles are notoriously easy to intercept with modern air defenses. It's unknown how many missiles were launched, but at least one got through, exploding on the Saratov and causing damage to the Caesar Kunikov and the Novocherkassk, setting both ships on fire. This was due to the fact that the attack was precisely timed, with the Saratov being fully loaded with munitions, an intelligence coup for Ukraine and the West. While the other 2 ships were able to pull out to sea and extinguish their fires, they were forced to retreat to Crimea as the Saratov sunk with an estimated 11 crew dead. The attack effectively shut down any chance Russia had of launching amphibious operations along the coast. But Russia had failed to learn to respect Ukrainian anti-ship capabilities, and Ukraine's next victim would be one of the most humiliating blows of the entire war. And if you've been following our coverage of Russia's performance so far, you know that is an incredibly high bar to reach at this point. There's little more humiliating and demoralizing than losing your flagship to an enemy attack, especially when it's destroyed by aging anti-ship missiles of the type that said flagship is specifically designed to protect the entire fleet from. Enter the tragedy of the Moskva, quite possibly the crowning achievement of Russian incompetence. Truth is, nobody really knows how the Moskva sunk, except the Ukrainians and their NATO allies. The Moskva certainly shouldn't have sunk, not just because it was specifically designed to protect the entire Black Sea Fleet from anti-ship missiles and air attacks, but because, structurally speaking, 2 missiles should never have been enough to sink such a large ship. This entire incident would basically force the Russian Navy to cower around Crimea, ending the days of its boldly sailing ships through the Black Sea, and inciting rumors that Russian warships were designed with a very fatal flaw. It would be Russia's first loss of a flagship in over 100 years, since the equally humiliating Russo-Japanese War, and the largest Russian vessel sunk during World War II. And it all began with the now infamous attack on Snake Island, during which the Moskva hailed the tiny Ukrainian garrison on the island and demanded their surrender. Instead, the Ukrainians made the helpful suggestion that the Russians should pursue sexual intercourse with themselves, prompting the Moskva to open fire. The incident would be memorialized in a stamp issued by Ukraine just days before the ship's sinking. According to the Russians, the outbreak of a fire late at night on the 13th of April 2022 prompted a munitions explosion. Sailors contained the fire as the Moskva single-handedly destroyed an entire American carrier strike group, then required towing to port when the Ukrainians bribed Poseidon, the angry god of the sea, to personally rise from the depths and pull the mighty Moskva to the depths, but not before slaying half of Poseidon's merman army. Now this, or some variation of it, and honestly who even cares at this point, was the Russian Ministry of Defense's official account. In reality, the Ukrainians used a Bayraktar drone to distract the Moskva while launching 2 Neptune anti-ship missiles. The missiles approached the Moskva from a completely different direction, and here the mystery deepens. The Moskva was a fleet air defense cruiser with a triple-layered air defense system that should have given the ship as much as 4 minutes of warning of the incoming missiles. Despite this, there was zero indication that the Moskva had made any sort of attempt to defend itself, with no reported activation of its S-300F or 9K-33 OSA air defense missiles, chaff, decoys, electronic jamming, or even its Sea-Whiz. It basically did nothing as it slowly watched 2 Cold War-era missiles happily cruising along toward it. But that's if it even was capable of seeing them. Unconfirmed rumors since the incident have stated the Moskva's air defense system was not fully operational and its radar systems could not have been fully powered up. At the time, this was shocking. But as we've all gotten a very intimate introduction into Russian incompetence and corruption, it just sort of makes sense now. When the Moskva detected the Bayraktar, either nobody bothered to look behind them or the ship was simply incapable of 360-degree radar coverage. Was it poorly maintained equipment, corruption leading to bad hardware and software, incompetent and poorly trained conscript crew? That's the fun part. With Russia, it's an absolute grab bag of incompetence and corruption, so any one of these could be true, or even all 3 of them. What we do know is how the Ukrainians found and tracked the Moskva, with the US revealing that a P-8 Poseidon maritime surveillance aircraft was loitering over the Black Sea at the time. The Poseidon was flying out of Italy and providing early warning of any possible Russian naval attack to the Ukrainians. It was also definitely not directly providing targeting data straight to the Ukrainian missiles as they screamed toward their moving target. In the end, the anti-ship missiles hit home and the ship managed to keep itself afloat for a while, until eventually being promoted to a permanent submarine. Crew deaths vary, with the official Russian figure being 18 and the insider claiming an absolutely insane 600 dead. The loss of the Moskva shook the Russian Navy to its core, and from that moment on, no Russian warships dared stray too far from Crimea, and wouldn't move so far west ever again in the war. Next on Ukraine's hit list was the rescue tug, the Vasily Bech. At first glance, it's hardly a war-winning prize, but these types of tugs are incredibly important for the health and maintenance of the fleet. Adding to the sting was the fact that the tug was only a few years old, having been commissioned in 2017. It's unlikely that the ship will be out of dry dock before the war is over, and judging by recent events, it's highly likely that it'll be destroyed in dry dock if the recent attacks are anything to go by. That brings us to the latest humiliation against the Russian Navy, the destruction of both a landing ship and a Kilo-class submarine, along with significant damage to the dry dock facilities themselves. The attack was weeks in the making, the culmination of a brilliant operation undertaken by the UAF, and proof that Ukraine is truly capable of fighting a multi-domain war. First, Ukraine launched an attack on a local S-400 air defense position near the Crimean coast. Details remain murky, but it's believed that Ukrainian special forces infiltrated the site via the shoreline on speedboats, eliminating all the personnel on site. With nobody to launch interceptors at the incoming missiles, a long-range repurposed Neptune missile destroyed the S-400 system. This created a massive gap in Russia's air defenses and local awareness, but Ukraine wasn't ready to strike just yet. First, it needed to eject Russian forces from a pair of oil platforms known as the Boyko Towers. Once more, Ukrainian commandos used speedboats to surprise the Russians and then proceed to eliminate all resistance. A Su-30 attempted a gun run to defend the position, but was forced to break off after it was damaged by a shoulder-fired air defense missile. Neither Russia or Ukraine at this point can make full use of the oil platform's strategic potential, but denying them to the enemy meant creating yet another awareness gap by taking over the local radar unit. By blinding Russia in the western Black Sea, Ukraine has made it much more dangerous for Russian naval and air forces to operate in the region, and easier to launch long-range attacks with smart weapons that can navigate toward their targets by exploiting radar gaps. Weapons like the British and French Storm Shadows used in the most recent attacks became a lot more effective by utilizing this gap. We have confirmation of the strikes from NASA's firm fire surveillance system designed to spot wildfires, and from satellite imagery, From both before and after the attack, it is clear that the Rostov-on-Don and the Minsk are mission kills and likely complete losses. But to sweeten the pie, Ukraine also managed to cause damage to the dry docks themselves, of which these two are the most important in the entire region. It'll likely take weeks to bring these dry docks back to operation, or even longer if Ukraine keeps these precision long-range attacks up. And it looks like that's what Ukraine's planning to do, because while literally making this video, fresh reports of yet another S-400 site in Crimea being destroyed are filtering in. Of 5 S-400 systems in Crimea, Russia's most expensive and advanced, there now only remain 3. Details continue to filter in over time, but only at the end of the war will we be privy to the full details of Ukraine's many victories. What is clear is that Ukraine is not doing this alone. The country has one hell of a fighting spirit and has proven itself to be courageous and ingenious both. But what it doesn't have is the type of long-range and long-endurance satellites that its NATO allies can provide. Intelligence gathered by NATO sensors, aircraft, and even spies on the ground have been completely critical to Ukraine's success. The world's gotten a taste of just how powerful NATO intelligence gathering is, even when it's not directly involved in combat inside of an active war zone. Even from a distance, NATO has been able to feed Ukraine a steady diet of up-to-the-minute actionable intelligence. But ultimately, it's the Ukrainian boots on the ground conducting daring raids deep behind enemy lines, or Ukrainian pilots screaming into very hostile skies just to get close enough to launch their Western-provided smart weapons that makes all the difference. One thing is clear, Russia has already lost far more in this war than it ever believed possible, and the Russian Black Sea Fleet is effectively neutralized. The best Russia can do is send its ships just offshore, ever fearful of a Ukrainian drone attack, to hastily launch missiles at civilian targets before fleeing to the illusion of safety inside their harbors. Now watch how war in Ukraine proves US military would dominate Russian military, or check out this video instead.